Hey, sorry about that, guys. Had a little hiccup this morning. I ran to reload my coffee cup while the intro was running, and had to help Eleanor into a bathtub before I could come back out here. So, good morning, everybody. Here we go. Joe Buddy asks, why can't SCOTUS jump in on the fake Trump cases? That's a good question, and largely the speculation on that is the appearance of impropriety is itself impropriety. There is concern that they would appear to be unduly influencing the election in that way. But there's also the procedural fact that while as long as the cases remain unresolved and the lower courts are still dealing with them, adjudicating and doing the appeals process, then they don't get moved to the Supreme Court yet. So that said, Joe, I hope that helps. There actually is a legal process that goes there. And that process needs to happen in the correct order. And to, if it helps, if it makes you feel better, the appeals court has already convened and heard arguments on the New York fraud case. And they haven't released a decision yet, again, because of the appearance of impropriety and election interference, etc. But the appeals court in that case was pretty clear that the appellate judges appear to seriously be considering sanctions on the Democrat lawyers that tried that case. By the time they got to their closing arguments, those lawyers were essentially just They were no longer arguing their case so much as begging not to be sanctioned and disbarred, which is what should happen. So I hope that helps. Now, let's get to this morning's topic. Basically, we're doing a follow-up on yesterday's show. So yesterday, I reported that there were videos. I gotta get this thing over here so I can do that. I reported that we had a bunch of videos of cops in Pennsylvania being sent out to shut down the voters in Pennsylvania. I meant to have gone back up to the top of this, but we've got many live videos recorded yesterday of police officers actively conducting an election interference campaign. So these are government agents preventing U.S. citizens from voting in a key swing state. And when we say key swing state, the numbers tell us that essentially Kamala cannot win unless she wins Pennsylvania. So, of course, Democrat ally Josh Shapiro, the Democrat Pennsylvania AG, former AG, now governor, who back in 2020 said, we will continue to count votes until Donald Trump loses the election. He's the man in charge over there. He's the governor over there. So please believe that he has massive influence over all of those police departments. And it's the police that are doing it. If any of you happen to be in PA and run into something like this, or anywhere, if you find police officers showing up to your polling location on an early voting day or on election day, God forbid, showing up and trying to shut you down and stop you from going in to vote, you call the sheriff. Because what that police officer is doing is committing a crime. And I won't rehash it as much. I won't rehash it in detail today like I did yesterday, but go back and watch yesterday's show, and I think I made a pretty compelling case that police officers engaged in this kind of activity, according to the law, should be arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and executed. That is what is prescribed for in law. And let's face it, they're willing to do what they're doing precisely because there are no apparent consequences. There are some good arguments against the use of the death penalty. Cameron will make the argument that the government cannot be trusted with that authority, and I kind of agree. I would say the government as it exists cannot be trusted with that authority. And that itself is evidence that the government as it exists should be abolished and reinstituted, reconstituted in compliance with the Constitution. That said, however, that we do not employ the death penalty in serious crimes is itself a reason that such crimes continue to be repeated. So, again, I actually agree with Cameron that the government as constituted currently cannot be trusted with that authority. And that is itself reason to abolish that government and form new government. So, back to Pennsylvania. This is another story that I wanted to point out before I get into the follow-up and kind of what came out yesterday. This was day before yesterday. Republicans cry foul after Pennsylvania official who encouraged voters to stay despite long lines was arrested at polling stations. So a GOP official in Pennsylvania was encouraging voters to stay in the line despite there being very long lines. Despite it being very long lines. And, the police were there harassing people and trying to intimidate them and tell them to go away and send them off. And there was a Republican official there saying, no, you have a right to vote. If you're in line, you get to vote. No matter what, if you're in line, they have to stay open until you get to vote. Stay in line, stay in line. And they arrested her. They dragged her ass off and put her in jail. That's insane. So yesterday, judge extends early voting option in PA County after Trump suit. A Pennsylvania judge on Wednesday sided with Donald Trump's campaign and agreed to extend an in-person voting option in suburban Philadelphia, where long lines on the final day led to complaints voters were being disenfranchised by an unprepared election office. We showed you the videos yesterday. Some of these cops were shutting down the line and sending people away at 1:00 in the afternoon. What? So that's absolutely a no-go. Judge Jeffrey Trauger said in a one-page order that Bucks County voters who want to apply for an early mail ballot now have until Friday. The Trump campaign's lawsuit, which was filed Wednesday morning, comes amid a flurry of litigation and complaints over voting in a battleground state that is expected to play a central role in helping elect the next president in 2024's election. The lawsuit sought a one-day extension through Wednesday at 5 p.m. for voters to apply in person for a mail-in ballot. The judge's order permits applicants through the close of business on Friday. Now, I'm a little torn on this. I think the judge made the right decision, but one of the things I pointed out yesterday, as they were turning voters away and, armed agents of the corrupt government were actively violating their civil liberties by preventing them from voting, they were offering, here, you can take this form and fill it out to get a mail-in ballot. Okay. Thing one. This is a little bit on the voters, right? Okay, so early voting's been going on for a while. So I will say, you know, to some extent, hey, you should have seen this coming. I've been saying it for weeks. Vote as early as you can, precisely because there's going to be shenanigans like this. And I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. I don't hate to say it. That's just the expression. So to some extent, it's on the voters for having waited to the last minute. It's not literally the last minute because, of course, they can still go on election day and vote. But the longer you wait to vote, the more likely it is that you will have your vote taken away from you either by a corrupt government sending armed agents to intentionally and actively interfere with your civil liberties, or by a corrupt Democrat Party who are actively harvesting ballots and committing fraud in order to try and steal an election they know they cannot win. Okay. That said, this idea that on Wednesday before the election, you're going to mail in an application to have a ballot mailed to you, which you are then going to mail back in. That's 3 mails. I mean, if you are on your P's and Q's and nothing goes wrong, maybe you get your mail-in ballot mailed back in. Now, okay, you get yourself a copy of an absentee ballot and go to a drop box. But this idea that they're gonna handle it with mail-in ballots, the mail-in ballots were always a bad idea. There's a reason that every other country in the world that has tried mail-in ballots has stopped doing mail-in ballots. The mail-in ballots are an absolute fail point where fraud is not possible, it is guaranteed. So, but that is a win. That is a win that the George said, no, or the George, that the court said, no, you will extend early voting to compensate these voters for the harm that was done to them. What I am not seeing that I want to see is that these officers do not appear to be suffering any consequences for their actions. They did the crime. They should absolutely do the time. And yes, by do the time, I mean they should be arrested for their crimes, prosecuted, convicted by a jury of their peers, and executed as is prescribed by law. Because an armed government agent actively interfering not just with a citizen's civil liberties, but in particular with the right of several citizens to engage in the election, that is an armed coup. What these police officers have done is they have engaged in insurrection. Well, in fairness, insurrection is an insurrection cannot be conducted by agents of the government. That's an important distinction. What they're doing is called a coup, right? That's a military action. These police officers have taken up arms and engaged in a military action against the United States Constitution and her government. They are enemies of the U.S. Period. That's what we mean when we raise our hand and we swear the oath and we say, I will defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Domestic enemies includes armed government agents conducting a coup against the Constitution. It's that simple. So let's move on to the next. Okay, so I showed you the video clips we talked about. We looked at that article. Another court case. So the Supreme Court Supreme Court's conservative justices leave in place Virginia's purge of voter registrations. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means. The Supreme Court's conservative majority on Wednesday left in place Virginia's purge of voter registrations that the state says is aimed at stopping people who are not U.S. citizens from voting. Let me explain what happened here. We covered this the other day. And Youngkin has talked about, Governor Youngkin has talked about what's going on here. So Virginia was engaged in removing some 6,000 people from the voter registration who are non-citizens. They ended up on the voter registration, in theory, by mistake. And Youngkin was very clear in interviews about this. The people we're talking about are self-identified non-citizens. So we're not even talking about illegal aliens here. We're not talking about, gangsters or whatever that came out of the Venezuelan mental institution and somehow managed to get on the voter roll. We're talking about people who are present legally in the country. They're not criminal aliens necessarily. Some of them may be, but they're not hostile foreign invaders. What we're talking about are people who are like resident aliens, right? Student visa holders, work visa holders, green card holders, people who are present legally, but, and so they can get a state ID and a driver's license legally, but they're not citizens, and so they do not have the right to vote in our elections. And so what's happened, this motor voter laws need to go. The motor voter laws, those are an absolute travesty. So what's happened is these people went to the DMV to get a driver's license. They checked on the form when they applied for the driver's license, I am not a U.S. citizen. And the DMV registered them to vote anyway. And so what Virginia is doing is removing these people who self-identified by checking the box on the application, I am not a U.S. citizen, removing them from the voting rolls. Kamala Harris's DOJ filed suit to stop Virginia from preventing these people from being removed. So I want you to understand what this article says. The Supreme Court's conservative justices leave in place Virginia's purge of voter registrations. Let me remind you of the DC versus Heller case. Chris, what does voting have to do with gun rights? In DC versus Heller, the conservative justices found that the Washington DC ordinances and regulations that made it very difficult for a person to own and carry a firearm were violative of the Second Amendment. And so the DC was forced to loosen its grip on infringing on the Second Amendment. It's still very difficult to keep and bear arms in Washington, D.C., because it is a rogue state operating in hostile defiance of the Constitution. But Heller was an important milestone case. But here's what I want you to understand. In the Heller case, and I'm about to tie this back into this case on Virginia, in the Heller case, the dissenting liberal justices did not argue that Washington, D.C. had the authority or the legal right to make laws for the purpose of controlling a person's right to keep and bear arms. Rather, they argued that the Second Amendment conveys no right, protects no right, and assumes no right of the individual citizen to keep and bear arms. The argument of the liberal justices was you do not, as citizens, have a right to keep and bear arms. The argument of the liberal justices was all privately held firearms are illegal. That was their argument. Go read the Heller case. It's eye-opening. So in this case, these liberal justices, and it's not the same liberal justices, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg is gone, but guaranteed Ginsburg would have found, like she did in Heller, with these other justices. And the conclusion is the liberal justices, they argued that the non-citizens should be allowed to vote. That's the position they took, is that the non-citizens should be allowed to vote. They are psychotic. They hate you, they hate everything that you are, and they seek to destroy you. So, I have not been a big fan of Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Barrett. I think they were both kind of the best, worst options. They're both kind of weak and flippy on a lot of the issues, but thank God they're there today. They got a little bit of something right. So I'll give them credit where credit's due. Now, just so we're clear, right? Like I just pointed out, there are government agents actively engaged in election interference right now. 3 Supreme Court justices, apparently all the police in Virginia, and the entire Federal Department of Justice apparatus are actively engaged in election interference. And not only that, you've got the media. We've got this from End Wokeness. ABC accidentally aired election results of Harris winning Pennsylvania by 5% with 100% reporting. Why does this chyron even exist a week before the election? The most generous assumptions we can make are that the chyron is somebody's just kind of fantasy, and they're playing with the analytics reporting software to check this and that. But that says to me that what's going on is they're just preparing ahead of time to cheat. Never forget, Donald Trump, this is not a statement in controversy. As of midnight on November 3rd, 2020, Donald Trump had won the election. And in every other election before that, the count on election day was the count. But in 2020, we had to keep counting for almost a month after that. For some reason. Because the water main broke, except it didn't. Because we found extra ballots in somebody's trunk in the parking lot. Tough shit. They weren't where they were supposed to be when they were supposed to be there. Chain of custody was broken. No. That is crime. Speaking of crime, and I'm going to close on this story today. Harris campaign caught manipulating X to censor criticism. In one part of this investigation into how Kamala Harris's presidential campaign is deceptively manipulating online platforms, it was revealed that the campaign is operating a Discord server that directs hordes of volunteers to use their social media accounts to deceptively push election propaganda. The goal is to artificially manufacture consensus by making pro-Kamala Harris messages on social media appear more popular than they are, and it is often done in violation of the terms of service of the social media platforms. Essentially, they're astroturfing and using bots to fake engagement online and manipulate the algorithms. They're actively doing this to all of the major social media platforms. And here's the best bit. this organization called Reddit Lies has published an archive on a dead man's switch. They infiltrated and archived the actual Slack communications. Is it from Slack? I'm sorry, from Discord. They have actually archived the communications from Discord in the Harris Walls office. So it's you got to be able to know what you're looking at to read it. But they have archived the communications from those offices and are reporting on what they're doing, right? And we've got names, we've got dates, we've got contacts, and we've got whole messages. Where they're basically coordinating activists to go and astroturf and engage in active manipulation of the media. Let's be clear about this. That means that the government, that would be Kamala Harris and her campaign, while she is currently holding elected office, is engaged in the propagandization of information on social media against the American people. That was a crime until the administration of Barack Obama and an executive order decriminalizing the use of propaganda by the federal government. So that's where we stand today. I am still very optimistic about Trump's chances of winning on Tuesday. But the fact of the matter is, there is a war going on for this country. It is being fought on social media. It is being fought in courtrooms. It is being fought at the ballot box. If you have not already voted, time is running out to go and do your early voting. Get it done. Get it done. And on that rather grim note, rather direct note, I guess, I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in it right there. Thanks for watching this morning, guys. We love you, and we'll see you tomorrow.